It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody, where every week we seek inspiration from great men and women to become the heroes and heroines of our own lives. And you are here with your hosts. I am Andrew Bernstein. You are Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing fabulous, Andy. Ready to go around the world in way less than 80 days. But somebody beat Jules Verne's record. The first person to beat Jules Verne's record. We are going to celebrate that woman today.
Yes, and her given name was what, Elizabeth Cochran, as I
Yes.
recall, but she became famous for her byline in the New York newspapers, and that was Nellie Bly. So,
Yes.
Nellie Bly went around the world in 72 days. And,
Amazing.
yeah, I met Jules Verne while she was on a layover in France. And we
Mm-hmm.
should, in fairness to Jules Verne, Rob, we should point out, he published that book in the early 1870s, 1871, 1873, somewhere in that range.
Mm-hmm.
And Nellie Bly went around the world in 72 days in 1889, 1890. So, technology had advanced a bit in the intervening 18 or so years. So anyway, you're right. She beat the record. It took Phileas Fogg. Phileas was a great book, by the way, Around the World in 80 Days.
Yes.
I love Jules Verne.
Absolutely.
We should
Yes.
probably do a hero show episode on Jules Verne at some point.
Worthy of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great
yeah,
visionary.
yes,
But
absolutely.
that was only one thing she did, Andy, as we're going to unpack today. She did a lot of other things. Trailblazing journalist. That's the thing. And part of her purpose for doing that, her race around the world, was to write about it and engage readers. So, as a woman, she was always told, you can't do this. This is only what men
Right.
do. So
That's
some
right.
questions for today, Andy, would be what underlies this will to succeed when everyone else says you will fail? That's one. She pretty much discovered the concept of investigative undercover journalism, where
Mhm.
you pretend you're someone and then you go and write an expose about it. So how important is that
Yeah, and
in
Robert,
today?
and in the women's lunatic asylum of all places, I can
Yes.
only imagine how
Yeah.
ghastly that must have been.
Yeah. 10 days. She wrote about that as well. And then what about traveling around the world? I kind of fancy myself as a globetrotter. I've been to many of the places that she did on that trip, with different conditions. But how do you learn from other people and other cultures? And does this kind of enhance your life? And last thing, what about this adventurous spirit? Nellie Bly had an adventurous spirit. We can all learn from her model. So those are some things we're going to
Yeah.
cover today,
No,
Andy.
no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, when she was a child, she was born somewhere in Pennsylvania, and
Yeah.
someone in the newspapers ran a story: "What are girls good for?" or "What are women good for?" And
Yeah.
their answer was, to be married and stay at home and and raise
Cook
children.
and clean.
Yeah, right. Which is a very conventional view of the role of women in human life. And I don't want to sound negative about being a mom or or a homemaker or anything, because that is to be a good parent is a really tough job. It really is. And it's a legitimate career for a woman if she wants to have children and raise a family. That's a legitimate
Mm-hmm.
career, but it's not the only legitimate career for women. And women, like men, you should have a choice. They may want
Yes.
to use their mind in other ways, or do both. When they're
Mm-hmm.
young, raise a family, and then become, a writer, lawyer, doctor, whatever,
Yep.
world traveler, like Elizabeth Cochran or Nellie Bly did. But anyway, yeah, what are women good for? And the sole answer was, to raise, to have babies and raise a family. So one legitimate career for a woman, but not the only one, right?
No, no, and so even before then, and she's one of 13 kids, and they all dress how to distinguish herself. She wore pink, so she would kind of stand out, and that was like a nickname they gave her. But after she saw this letter in the newspaper, she wrote basically the Pittsburgh Dispatch. It was, and she wrote a letter to the editor saying, no, women can do this, girls can do this, they can do this, they can do that. and she signed it, I think, an orphan, like a lonely orphan. That was, she didn't even give her name. And the editors were so impressed with her, Andy, that but because they didn't know who she was, they like posted an ad. Will the orphan write to us? She does. They hire her. So now she's family moves to Pittsburgh, and she's off. She's off on her career. Which, talk about careers for women, Andy. At that time, it was teacher and mom. There was like writers, journalists was not. That was not a career option. So everywhere she went, she had to be way better in order to get published.
Yeah, we should point
Yeah.
out that some women had broken through as writers, and we did a show on Jane Austen, and the Bronte
Yes.
sisters did, and Emily Dickinson in the United States. But it was always a battle. It was always a struggle uphill. Jane
Right.
Austen had to publish her works anonymously, and so on. And it's really, I mean, the best word for that is just dumb. Why?
Yeah.
Intelligence doesn't break down along gender lines. Why subjugate half the intelligence of the human race? You don't know what any given girl's going to grow up to be, a scientist or a writer, or a philosopher, or an MD or whatever. So it's unintelligent. But and the main point, of course, is it prevents women from actualizing their potential and living a fulfilled life. The secondary, but still important point is it deprives humanity of all of this latent genius that now doesn't get untapped. But anyway, Nellie Bly had the courage to stand up to this conventional mentality and say, no, women can do all kinds of things.
That's right. That's right, Andy. And one of the first things she did, and she's young, everything she did in her life, she was super young. This is only 2021 when she joins Pittsburgh Gazette. And then she goes to Mexico as a foreign reporter. Again, they're like, are you kidding? A woman alone going to Mexico? And she does. She comes back writing an expose about the dictator Diaz.
Yeah, she had to flee from Mexico. Weren't they going to arrest her?
I think they actually did arrest her, and then she found her way. She was resourceful, absolutely. Again, this kind of character. Let's just make this clear: this kind of character is not limited. It is not gender specific. It is like humans have this ability. It's not only men or only women have this ability, and it should be celebrated. And fortunately, Andy, we are one place to do that. But she was even fleeing for her life.
Yeah, she had a vision. You mentioned Jules Verne as a visionary in a certain way. That's absolutely true. Nellie Bly was a visionary. She saw the potential in human life, the kind of adventures that are out there. What I like to call the explorer's premise. I mean, she was on the I've done a course on that, and given it many times on how to be an impassioned value, and talking about being on the explorer's premise and recognizing the world is a wide place and there's a million different things, activities, people that can be really exciting, and a lot of people don't have it, or that vision, or else if they do, they're afraid of it. They kind of cower. My mom was severely agoraphobic, and did adventure from the house for many years. And she's hardly the only one. But Nellie Bly had that vision of life's possibilities, and she embraced it. She was not afraid. She was courageous and went out and did all these things that were dangerous. If you were Shane, a really tough guy with both fists and guns, it would be dangerous. Never mind for a woman. So Mexico was a wild place, back then. And she risked her life. She risked her life, writing, telling the truth about the dictator. So we're talking about a courageous human being. Yeah, she was. She really was.
And Pittsburgh is not big enough. It's one of those things. She had outgrown the level of journalism in Pittsburgh. So what does she do? She goes to New York, which is the media capital, certainly of the U.S. It was actually called what is now Park Road downtown, was called Newspaper Road. There were so many different newspapers at the time, and Joseph Pulitzer, one of the ones he ran was called the New York World. And despite resistance, she goes and gets hired by him, persuades him. You know what I want to do? I want to look at this. Okay, setting the context about women, Andy. This is how bad things were. They would just be declared insane if a husband, for instance, if a husband had an affair and the wife objected to that, he could take her to court. This is actually what happened to centuries earlier to Alexander Hamilton's mother. Take her to court and have her put in an insane asylum. It was not completely, very, very difficult to do that. They were, and so she knew about this.
Right, and we should point out too, this is before Freud, however crazy he himself was, pioneered the field of clinical psychology. So they just locked people who were considered insane away. Bedlam, they called it in England, right? Bedlam. It was a place of complete wild, out of control, people. And some of them were insane. And some of them were innocent, like you said, got put away by on their husbands' say so. So it was hellish. These are hellish conditions, and most in these, and the name of it was the Women's Lunatic Asylum. I mean, just the name would tell you something. Yeah. And there was very poor treatment of the people who were mentally ill. It was you see the descriptions. There was excrement everywhere, and it's just
rats sharing food with rats, and it's just and normal women as were thrown together with what we would call clinically insane women. And this is on what is today called today called Roosevelt Island. Back then it was Blackwell's Island, and which is in
the middle of the East River. Right,
middle of the East,
between Queens and Manhattan.
Between Manhattan and Queens, and now they actually glorified her, with a beautiful, massive plaque. I went there a couple of years ago, and so she has this idea. Let me go there.
Yeah, Robert. But before you tell us, let me interject for just a second.
Yes.
Because about healthy women being consigned to the insane asylums just on their husband's say so. One of the great movies of all time, Gaslight. I don't know if you've ever seen it. A great Ingrid Bergman role where she won one of her Best Actress Oscars. Where the term gaslighting in politics today comes from that movie, Gaslight. Right. And her husband, played brilliantly by Charles Boyer, was trying to drive her insane so he could commit her. I don't want to give away the plot too much, in order to further his own criminal activities. And a lot of times, you're right, absolutely right. A lot of times, healthy women were consigned into bad enough to put somebody who really is mentally into a disgusting, situation like those lunatic asylums were back then. But to put a healthy person in and she has no legal recourse to get out, that's really evil. That's just evil.
Yeah. So they make this agreement with the New York World that because once you get in, how do they let you out?
Yeah, if I was Nellie Bly, I'd be on my knees. Look, Mr. Pulitzer, I want to do this, but please don't leave me there. Don't leave me
Come
there.
on day 10, okay?
Yeah,
I'm going to be there 10 days.
There.
You better be there the morning of day 11 or else. But even before then, she's practicing. She's looking at the mirror. She's making all these weird faces and stuff. She's getting into character. And then, Andy, after 2 days, she's not even pretending anymore that she's insane. She's actually normal. But everyone else around her is claiming that she's insane. So she comes out after the brutal experience, exposes the story. Fortunately, millions of dollars pour in to the asylum to clean it up and make it more humanitarian in the good sense. And now she's like 23, 24 years old, Andy, and she's like a household name. I mean, this was an incredible achievement that she did. And
again, the Mexico experience, this would be courageous to go into this hellish place, even if you were a big, strong guy, was a fighter and everything. If you were John L. Sullivan, the heavyweight champion of the world, this would be a hellish experience. But for a slender woman to be in this hellhole with some people who really are mentally ill, and some of them criminally insane. My God, for 10 days, well, I'd be, if I, as a devout atheist, I'd be praying to God constantly, let Mr. Pulitzer not forget that I'm here and come get me,
Yeah.
when the 10 days are up.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
By the
Yeah.
way, it's one other point I want to say. This is the kind of woman that Gail Wynand, in our favorite novel, The Fountainhead, Ayn Rand's great novel, The Fountainhead, he had the best reports. It was a yellow press scandal sheet, but that's what Pulitzer was famous for also.
Right.
But I mean, he had the best reporters, and he would have hired Nellie, and this is his era. He would have hired, turn of the 20th century, he would have hired Nellie Bly in a heartbeat. Yeah, you
That's
go,
right.
girl. You go, girl. You go do these
Yes.
kinds of adventurous things. This is
Yeah.
great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Although after, so she reaches this height, and then she wants more money from them. What you're boosting circulation, and you should be financially compensated, right? And they're like, no. So she has this idea a couple of years later of traveling around the world. And that, again, once again, everyone tells her, this is where we talked about, what kind of will to succeed despite all this opposition. I mean, this is heroism. This is genuine heroism. And she had it in spades. And she has this idea, reads Jules Verne's book, and it's like, I want to do this. I want to do this for the New York World. And they're saying, no, you can't do this. Women carry with big luggage, massive luggage. They need to be chaperoned. And she's like, okay, New York World, if you don't want me to do it, I'm going down the block to your competitor, and they're going to pay me. Oh, hold on, wait, come back. Okay, we'll have you do it. And then she takes off, and it actually even spurs a competition, because some other paper hired another woman to do the trip going the opposite way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Nellie Bly was I think it was November 1889.
Yeah.
She went east on an ocean liner across the Atlantic. And
yes.
And the competitor went west across the United States by train. Good thing she didn't go. The other competitor didn't go by covered wagon. This is 1889, so no covered wagons anymore, right? James J. Hill and Edward H. Harriman. Actually, I don't think Harriman had taken over the Union Pacific.
Not yet.
No, yeah, it's a few years later. But
mm-hmm.
But Hill had shown what transcontinental railroads could be like. So yeah, the race was on, and I can imagine that this really boosted circulation for these tabloids.
Absolutely,
where keep tabs on Nellie Bly, and keep tabs on the other paper. Keep tabs on I don't remember her competitor's name, but keep tabs on on the one who's racing Nellie Bly around the world. So yeah, this must have been great for business.
Yeah, it definitely was. And she's also reporting on what she's observing, the snakes in India and all these different things. The Suez Canal she goes through, which was like a landmark achievement in human history. Hong Kong, right. Singapore.
Yeah, and we could point out, Robert, one of our earlier hero show, subjects, Samuel Morse, had created the telegraph.
That's right.
A few decades before, the 1840s. This is 1880s. So Nellie Bly's able to telegraph, send telegrams back to New York to report on her progress, and they run it in the newspapers, and people are reading the adventures of Nellie Bly. Here she's in in Europe, and then she's in India, or whatever the places were on her ports of call. So she was able. I don't think the telephone was. The telephone wasn't the transatlantic cable for the telephone wasn't. Transatlantic cable for the telegraph was laid by Cyrus Field right after the Civil War. Telephones weren't available. She couldn't pick up a landline telephone like from Europe or Asia and call New York, but she could telegraph, and she did. Send back. It's hard to describe your adventures in a telegram. But I don't know, but she must have had to keep it pithy, and maybe
it's hot. That was one of the things, basically she's in the South, whether it's the Middle East, which is all deserty, and it's basically, and everyone's complaining how hot it is, and she's like, yeah, no problem, I'm on my way, and so and that was the means that was a means of communicating. And mail was pouring into the New York world. You know, their circulation is boosting. I mean, they're just seeing this. Everybody's following this, you know, this event, and you know, Andy, we could go. This was also part of the era where achievement was completely, you know, celebrated and anticipated in technology, because she's using what today we certainly don't call technology, but these, you know, she wasn't doing this in a canoe, you know, and like you said, she's using a telegram, whatever the most advanced technology is there.
Well, transatlantic ocean liners as opposed to sailing vessels, trains as opposed to covered wagons, telegraph as opposed to, you know, carrier pigeons, or, you know, snail mail letters. So this was the high tech, you know, facilities of the era. This is 1890.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's even like a chant for Nellie Bly will win or die, you know, like they know there's a race.
She might die. It's so dangerous.
Some of the places going on. And then she makes it all the way to, you know, to San Francisco, right? To around the world, through the Pacific, and then, you know, private train car brings her back to Hoboken, and she's announced the winner. And again,
she beat the other woman by a few days.
Yeah,
right?
by a couple of days. Yeah. And it's not as if she was dropping everything. I mean, she enjoyed the entire trip. It wasn't as if she's in for 5 minutes and like me, I buy a magnet in the state and it's like, okay, now I got proof I've been to this all 50 states because I have magnets.
Right. There's just two comments I want to make on this. One is she met with Jules Verne in France when she was there on a layover and had a sit down, I think, with him for, I guess she was waiting for a train or something. And two, history doesn't remember who finishes second. You know,
no, sadly, Buzz Aldrin. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. The second man to walk on the moon.
Yeah,
that's right. And so even us, the hero worshippers, we didn't, you know, we could have found out and written it down, you know, but didn't bother. But she, you got to give her credit though. She did a great job also, you know, let's call her the mystery guest because we don't know her name, but she also went around the world in just a few days more than Nellie Bly, you know, completed this dangerous trip. But Nellie Bly won the race. We remember her, and like I said, history doesn't remember those who finished second.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. That's unfortunate because people should, you know, it's still an achievement.
Oh yeah.
And you know, in football, I mean, last night was a Super Bowl. Philadelphia Eagles lost. It's almost worse to lose the big game, you know, than to even be in it. You know, we used to have this joke in the 90s. What's the Buffalo area code? 044, because they're in 4 Super Bowls and they lose all 4. Yeah. It's like, forget about being in second, you know, and so it's a good point. I mean, it's definitely a good point that the glory to, you know, goes to the winner. In case
you know, I've read Alexander Graham Bell beat one of his rivals to the patent office by a matter of hours, you know, for the patent for the telephone. Yep. So
who was that guy?
Who was the second guy? How many years did he spend, you know, to invent his version of the telephone? You know, how much genius and how much hard work. But it is sad, but we celebrate heroes like Bell and Nellie Bly and people like that who came in first. So.
Yeah. So after all this euphoria, again, she wants more money. She wants to be paid properly. And New York World says no. She goes to Chicago and goes to the, I think, Chicago Times Herald, and is working there, and still young. You know, still in her, not even 30 yet, maybe right around 30, 31.
Well, she was born in 1864, right?
Yes.
So she'd be pushing 30 by the early 1890s.
Pushing 30, meets a man who's in his 70s.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The president of Ironclad Manufacturing Company, and she was against marriage most of her life. She had, if we go back to her childhood, her father died, I think, when she was 6, and then her mother remarried, and the man was an abusive alcoholic, and she had to go at like age 13 to court to testify that this man was a scoundrel when he was drunk, and he was a scoundrel when he was sober, and so she was against marriage as a way of like tying one down, which makes perfect sense.
Well, it often persecutes women. Back then women didn't, their rights weren't recognized to get a divorce, or to prevent the guy from putting me in an insane asylum, and that's horrible.
Yeah. So, but she meets this guy, Robert Seaman. They fall in love. He's running the ironclad manufacturing company, and his family's against it because they think she's a gold digger. But no, she actually learns the business. And then even as he gets more older and sickly, she's tending to run the business, and eventually it makes inventions. Like, okay, she's almost like, journalism's not enough right now. Let me see about industrialism, Andy. Okay. How about I conquer that field? I'll have a patent for oil barrels. Okay. The Rockefellers can't even do the right oil barrels for all of their oil that they're importing right around 1900. She's like, no, I'm going to do this. And she's like, one quote I love, she's like, I was determined to make steel containers for American trade. She wanted to have this, this product out there. So she's got this whole other
and like
talent.
you said, she invented some new kind of barrels, some new kind of vessel that could I don't remember the details. Some new kind of vessel that could contain different types of materials.
Yeah, the huge barrels and even stacking objects into each other. She had a couple of patents. I mean, she was a businesswoman as well.
Yeah, and so we like to integrate here. Steel, at the turn of the 20th century. Well, who's the big name in steel? Of course, some of the heroes that we've already discussed: Andrew Carnegie, Charles Schwab. Who mass-produced steel, brought the price of it way down so that barrels could be made inexpensively, not to mention automobiles and skyscrapers and many other things. But Nellie Bly took advantage of the inexpensive steel, and she reminds me again. Go back to our favorite novel, The Fountainhead. The great elderly designer Henry Cameron tells on his deathbed, he's telling Howard, watch the plastics industry, Howard. Watch the light metals industry, Howard. You're gonna have to show the fools what new forms are now possible, made possible by the human mind. Well, you get steel, you're not working with iron anymore, certainly not with wood. And there's new devices, there's new containers, there's new kinds of barrels, there's new kinds of things that you can make with it. Nellie Bly was one of those innovators who took the inexpensive steel and ran with it. So I mean, there's another feather in her cap.
Amazing, amazing. Then her husband dies 1904, so she's now around 40, and eventually the company does go bust. There were some shady investments, and she had a bunch of social programs, so she didn't have that mindset for running a profitable business, certainly after her husband died. So she goes back into journalism. Okay, the New York Evening Journal, she goes into that, fighting now for women's rights, the suffrage movement. She had interviewed Susan B. Anthony, and just pushing forward in all aspects of life as we go, early into the 20th century.
Let me say one thing here, because women's rights and things like that, or civil rights, I think the best, most accurate terminology would be individual rights for women. The individual rights for Black Americans during the civil rights movement, because there's no women's rights, there's no men's rights, there's individual rights for individual human beings. I think we should, Confucius said the beginning of wisdom is see to it that things are called by their right names. And I think the civil rights movement, which was very successful, and and we didn't want Luther King, as one of our heroes, is really the individual rights movement for Black Americans or for non-white Americans. Anyhow. Yeah. But Nellie Bly certainly was active. Women weren't allowed to vote. I mean, my God. So she was very active in the women's suffrage movement, and she wrote a bunch of novels also, didn't she? Is that recall?
Yeah. On top of
everything else, she was a novelist.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know much about them. I couldn't find. The only book I did read was 10 Days in a Madhouse, which is I think they even made a movie. There's a couple of documentaries, in fact, on her life,
Days in a
with
Madhouse.
based around that 10 Days in a Madhouse. But she just continues on, and then I guess the only thing she didn't conquer was longevity, because she really didn't live that old. 1922.
Yeah,
Is when she
50. She wasn't even 58 yet. She was short of her 58th
yeah
birthday. Died of pneumonia, right?
contracted pneumonia, which back then was close, pretty close to a death sentence.
Yeah,
I
there
mean,
was no
they've been
antibiotics. No
yeah
antibiotics at that
yeah.
point.
And but then, when she dies, it's like her legacy now starts to rise, and all of the changes that she pioneered, whether again it's this investigative journalism, it's this travel and writing about your travel, every travel log. Like, she was one of the ones that would do that's again, that's one of my personal passions, is writing about the places and spaces that I go to. And I just love that. But the investigative journalism, Andy, I mean, we mentioned this guy, James O'Keefe, in the past, and like, he's the one who walks around recording, bad guys admitting bad things. And I actually think that's legitimate,
Yeah.
that's
James O'Keefe from Project Veritas.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. The one who changed Rutgers University from having the Lucky Charms, because as an Irishman, that leprechaun was an insult to his
Yes.
Irish heritage. But yeah, I mean, this is a way to get the news out there, actual news. When people are admitting on camera, but not knowing they're on camera, these are facts. These are facts. And she was the first one to put that kind of method to the test, and the results were fabulous. So, complete trailblazer, in the field of journalism, in the field of travel, and then travel logs, and just always pushing the envelope. So for me, it's like, these are life lessons that we can,
Yes.
and like you said, Andy, having that adventurous spirit, knowing that, whether it's going to be in Mexico or Hong Kong or, India, I have a mission, and I'm going to deal with it. I mean, I think one of her best lines is, I said I could, I would, and I did. Okay. In other words, she always backed up. She was backed up some kind of promise, and it was the more people who said, no, you can't do this, Nellie, the stronger she went in that direction of proving them wrong.
Yeah, she's a real heroine. I just want to, in honoring Nellie Bly, I just want to close, mention again, what I call the explorer's premise in my course on how to be an impassioned value, and then again the realization Nellie Bly had this, she just had this, very strongly in her spirit. This recognition, the world is a wide place. There's all kinds of, some people don't know what they want to do with their life. Which is sad, and and if they're young, it's not so terrible because they could find out. But some people live their whole life and never found something that really set their soul on fire. And Nellie Bly's attitude is, well, our favorite teacher, Dr. Leonard Peikoff. I remember somebody once asked him in the Q&A, how do you find what you love in life? How do you find what you really want to do in life? And Dr. Peikoff responded, how do you put it? He said, quote, this is an off the cuff remark in real time. He said, a quote, reality is enormously fascinating to a rational man. Unquote. Yes. And so the difficulty then is to kind of like limit yourself to one or two things. What Nellie Bly did three or maybe four if we could include her career as a novelist. But there's a wide world out there. So get out there and explore. And it's not just physical. And part of it's physical, like she did on her around the world adventure. But there's libraries filled with books, and there's schools that teach all kinds of different subjects. And you don't even have to leave your hometown. You could live in Paducah, Kentucky. Not to insult anyone in Paducah, Kentucky. You could live in a small town and but get out, and you do things, go to school, go to the library, go to work, and you meet people,
Yeah.
and you can meet all kinds of people who are interesting and find friendship that way, find romantic love that way. But be on that explorer's premise. Get out into the world and investigate all of the mystery and the drama and the majesty and the magnitude and the hellish stuff too that Nellie Bly experience, and went out. She ran out to meet this.
Yes.
She didn't even go out to meet it halfway. She raced out into the world, like 100% of the way. So that kind of spirit will lead you to an exciting, and you can find the things and the people and the activities you love, and then you can fill your life with the things and the people you love. And Nellie Bly certainly did that. And I think
no limitations, Andy. I'm sorry if I could just add.
Yeah.
Whatever conventional wisdom says about you, other people's opinion, this is Les Brown quote, other people's opinion has no bearing on who you are. Okay, it is your own. Do you think Nellie Bly had high self-esteem? I think, before the term came out, I mean, she embodied it in spades. And I even left out the war correspondence, Andy, World War I. She even did that stuff. I mean, it's like, yeah, we can keep going, but that kind of thing where there's no limitation, other people's opinion of you, especially today, where everyone's offended by every single thing. Can you imagine her being offended? It's off the charts, that kind of mindset that she had, that adventurous mindset, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely right. Other people tell Nellie Bly, you can't do this. And Nellie Bly very calmly realized, you don't get a vote.
That's right. That's right. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
So let's salute the great
her
woman, Nellie Bly, your courage, your independence, your adventurousness, living life large on the explorer's premise. We salute the great Nellie Bly. Today, I don't think a lot of people remember her, so I'm glad we could bring her achievements to a wider audience, because she certainly deserves it.
If you go to New York City, go to Roosevelt Island, because that's where there's this massive monument to her. I highly recommend.
Where the women's lunatic asylum used to stand. But everybody out there in Hero Land, thanks again for tuning in for our for us discussing and seeking inspiration from these great heroes and heroines in human life. And we'll be back next week once again on the Hero Show. So we'll see you then.